Welcome to the Supernatural with Laura Maxwell on Eternal Radio. In these programs, we will hear the true supernatural accounts from those who try various spiritualities.
You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
Today we have a guest from Vancouver, Canada, and her name is Natalia. I'm really looking forward to this interview. Actually, people do wait to get on the show, sometimes for months, just because of the guest list. It takes a while for them to get on the show, so I've been looking forward to this one for some time. So let's go now and say hello to Natalia.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really excited to do this.
Yes, I'm really excited to have you on, finally.
It's been a long time coming, but worth it.
It has, yes, absolutely. So please just fire ahead, Natalia. And first of all, tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Okay, so I was raised in a family that spiritually, we were raised in a Catholic home, came in a very, very traditional Catholic upbringing. In general, there was basically like a very traditional kind of ritualistic kind of lifestyle around that. So we went to Sunday school. We also attended basically the classes that you have to take in order to have your first communion and all of that as a young child. But interestingly enough, like when I was a little girl, even though there was definitely a specific way that we were supposed to do things being Catholics, I do remember, and this very vividly, is that as a 4-year-old child between the ages of 4 and 5, I always felt like a very open ability to speak directly to Jesus Christ in my room, so I had a very loving connection to him personally. And I would just, go to my room and sit in my bed and just talk to him and have a normal conversation like I'm having right now.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I needed to go through a third party in order for me to have access. And that was something that I hold dear to my heart to this very day, because it really just reminds me the true reason why Jesus came for us was really for us to be in relationship with him versus being in religion with him, which is, very different. I feel like what I was taught in school wasn't necessarily how I felt about him in my own personal time. But that being said, I'm really grateful that I was raised in a home where Jesus Christ was basically the God that we worshipped. And there was definitely very challenging moments throughout my childhood as my parents did separate. So there was definitely tumultuous times in that period when they were separating, and there was, arguments in the home. And I really feel like my conversations with Jesus Christ really allowed for me to not necessarily escape what was going on in the home, but to find refuge and to really find comfort when I would just be in my bed and just, holding on to my dolls and talking to him and, telling him what I was doing in my day. Asking questions. I was always a very, very curious child. And even to this day, I'm still a very inquisitive, curious person. So I felt a lot of love and true acceptance in those very innocent conversations as a child.
Well, that's really beautiful. And did you find that he did give answers? Did he give, signs that he was hearing your prayers and give you direction and things like that? Did you notice that as a child?
I mean, I don't necessarily remember there being like an actual audio, like hearing his voice, but more so sensing his presence. And I would ask innocent questions about like, why is this happening to my family, and why are mommy and daddy not getting along, and that kind of thing. So, I mean, there were different, and sometimes it was just like, why is this happening in school? Like there was a whole different, type of questionnaire that I had for him. But what I really felt, was that although what was going on the outside was scary for a young person to witness, I really felt his comfort, and I really felt loved. And I do remember, that even when I was a little girl, I would have really peaceful dreams. And I do remember, I think it was more so in my dreams that I felt like he would show me things, or at least, I would be playing in a garden or be somewhere that was very peaceful and very like joyful. And the Holy Spirit really did, wash over me as a child. And I really held on to that. And I really appreciate that. I never felt like I needed to ask permission to do that. And my brother slept in the same room as me, but I would usually do it when he was sleeping, or when he was like, distracted doing his own little thing. But yeah, that was something very dear to me. And that's one of the reasons why when I was going to Sunday school and like learning all of these things in the Catholic way of doing things, it really conflicted with me, because I didn't feel comfortable, confessing my sins to a complete stranger in a very strange setting, which is, the way that Catholics, do confession. And, when I was going through that, it felt very strange to me, because I was like, well, I already do this, like I already talked to God. I don't really feel like I need to tell somebody that I don't know. So there was a lot of times where I would be asking questions, in Sunday school, and I didn't really feel like that particular church was equipped in order to answer these questions, because they weren't necessarily referring to biblical truths. It was more like Catholic doctrine. And so I really, as an adult, I see why, the teacher maybe didn't really even know how to respond, because from what I've learned now and from my relationship with Jesus now, like, and reading his word, it's very contrasting in many ways. And I feel like it's unfortunate, because by the time I was, I did my first communion, by the time I was about 11, 12 years old, I certainly started falling away from that relationship, because I just felt like the reason we went to church was because it was tradition, and it was more so we go because my parents go. It wasn't because I felt a genuine love anymore. And that was really sad, because that's when kind of all of the side effects of living in a separated home, with divorced parents, really started to set in. So yeah, by the time I was about, 11, 12 years old, my parents had separated, and that was very confusing for me as a child. Like I didn't understand like why that would happen. Why would God let this happen, type of a thing. So there was definitely some resentment and some anger that started to build up in my heart. Not really getting any answers, and seeing my mother, fall into depression after that was very hard. As a child, all you want is to, enjoy your life and to have fun and to play and to see your parents, involved with you emotionally and physically. And the separation was very hard on my mom. I think, I definitely don't hold any resentment or blame on any side of my mother or my father. But by the time they were separated and when I was about 7 or 8, the lead up to that was already so exhausting for my mom. And so, yeah, she fell into a depression. And as a young child and going into my teen years, it was extraordinarily challenging for me emotionally to witness my mom be so withdrawn. And unable to really, and she worked so hard to provide for me and my brother. There was never any lack of food or clothing. Like, we were always provided for, and she was always a very loving, extraordinarily sweet, to this day, very, very gentle, sweet, kind soul. But for about 5 years, witnessing her in a deep depression was very hard for me. So by the time I entered basically high school here at the age of 13, I was like just seeking like independence away from being around the home, because I felt frustrated with her. I felt angry. I felt like I wanted to just be in my own circle and not have to deal with all that stuff that was going on at home. And I ended up going to a school that was an inner city school. So there was definitely a lot of challenges in that school, as far as, you know, there being a lot of violence and children that came from homes that were a little bit, you know, tougher in the sense of, you know, parents that were kind of absent or not really around, or, you know, with alcoholism and different issues like that. So I fortunately was always very like studious like a studious child. Like I really committed to making sure that I still studied, and I got, you know, went to class and did all of that. But I did start to hang around people that were great, you know, kind-hearted people that, but were, you know, dabbling in things like, you know, drugs and drinking and that. And because I come from an immigrant family, my mom's way of raising me was so different to the way that my peers were being raised, my Canadian peers were being raised. So my mother, being a mother, was very protective, extraordinarily protective. And she didn't, of course, she didn't want me to get in trouble or to get into harm's ways. So she was extremely overprotective. And I feel like that made me even more resentful, made me even more angry. And yeah, by the time I was about, you know, 16, 17 years old, like I was a very angry, rebellious kid. Like I continued to get average grades, but, you know, was definitely in a very toxic relationship with my mother, didn't have much respect for her, didn't want to be around her at all. And at this point, the relationship that I had with my father, like I would still continue to visit him on the weekends, but it wasn't, you know, like, and I, you know, I started to realize certain things as an adolescent that I couldn't see as a child. And so I started to see kind of where the cracks were in the relationship. And so I started to place the blame, you know, on both of them. And I still, you know, would hang around him, but I didn't really feel like a super closeness to him by the time I was about 16 years old. And unfortunately, you know, the separation affected him in different ways. And I really didn't feel like as a young woman that I was being validated or very much, what's the word I'm looking for? Steward and guided in a way that a father should really steward a teenager, especially, you know, in an environment where, you know, there's so much peer pressure to be doing drugs and to, you know, engage sexually and to drink and to do, and, you know, to smoke and to do all these things. Yes, for me, my parents were very clear that no, it's not allowed. But I didn't grow up in a family where it was okay for us to really talk about it. So it was like, no, and that's it. But as a child, when everyone else is saying yes, you kind of want to trust your parents to be able to ask them questions and to talk about it. So it's just, it was very challenging for me because all I would hear was no. And so the more they would say no, the more I would act out and seek validation and finding friendships. And also by this point in having relationships, like, you know, getting a boyfriend. And I started acting out in several ways. Like, I remember having a conversation relationship, basically a phone relationship with a person like in a different country. And it was like of a very illicit nature. And I was very young. And I feel like I did that. And it was, you know, potentially that could have been very dangerous because we all know the dangers of you know, predators that are out there in the online world. And so I was kind of, you know, manipulated into a situation like that because I was seeking attention and I was seeking validation. And, you know, when I was 16, I entered into a relationship. And this was very clear to me now that I entered this relationship because all I wanted to do was to be loved. You know, all I wanted to do was to get the attention and to be loved. Unfortunately, at the same time that I entered this relationship, I also, around towards the end of my high school years, I became pretty sick to my stomach because I had a really bad bout of like food poisoning. I was highly addicted to fast food and sugary foods and everything unhealthy. And one bad batch of fast food got me and my brother extremely sick. Very, very sick. So it was kind of like the perfect storm. I fell severely ill, and everything you can imagine that could go wrong in the digestive system. I had all of those symptoms, and it kept going on. And we were going to different doctors and we weren't getting any really conclusive answers. And at this point, they were overly medicating us with a whole bunch of different things and giving us several tests, and we weren't really feeling any better. So here in where I live, it's very normal. And I mean, internationally now, it's changed a lot in the last 15 years, but people were just like, oh, why don't you just smoke marijuana, because it'll alleviate your symptoms of nausea. You'll be able to have your appetite again. You'll be able to eat. And, like, I know that your parents are totally against that, but drugs that the doctors are giving you are still drugs. It's just that they're doctors, and marijuana is a drug too. It's just natural. So that kind of like changed my perspective a little bit. And even though I know that my mom would be extraordinarily angry at me for doing that, I was like, at this point, I don't know what else to do because I'm losing weight and I'm totally sick. And my boyfriend at the time, his mother and him, were very open smokers of it. And so I began to smoke and very quickly became extremely dependent on it. I really much enjoyed the feeling that I had from it. Like, I physically alleviated my nausea and all the symptoms that I had temporarily. And I just completely began to depend on it also for emotional comfort too. This relationship that I had with this young guy was very toxic as well. He was not necessarily a bad person, but came from a home that had issues. And so we were constantly fighting. There was constantly like belittling and just like not necessarily abusive behavior physically, but there was definitely like verbal I wouldn't want to say the word abuse, but definitely just like verbal language that was not in any way healthy for me at that point in my life. And so again, I just continued to use marijuana. The one positive thing that came out of this food poisoning that I had was that it allowed for me and my brother to really analyze our lifestyle and to really look at it and say, okay, the doctors aren't really helping us. They're not really giving us any answers. We have to really kind of take our health into our own hands. And so we kind of did a whole detox. We changed our diet. We cleaned up all of our cupboards and our fridge and started to, heavily research, all the things that were in the food industry, and began to have a very healthy lifestyle and take herbs and supplements. So it took us, about three months after being sick for about a year to get ourselves back more or less to normal. But even though my symptoms were going away from my stomach issues, I did not stop smoking marijuana. And I graduated and I continued to smoke heavily, and I was still in this relationship with this person. And at this point, basically marijuana was kind of like the connection that I would have to meeting different people. So if a person was also a smoker of this, I would instantly become friends with them. So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, hey, how are you? What do you do? Where do you come from? What do you like? It was like, oh, you smoke, I smoke, we can be friends. So there was very little filtration, very little like analysis and thorough kind of reflection as to, are these the right people that I should be hanging out with, kind of a thing. And yes, that continued for years. I mean, I ended up being in this particular relationship for about 6.5 years on and off. It really took a toll on me emotionally and mentally because it was just so tumultuous. It was so volatile. I ended up being kicked out of my mom's home because she did find paraphernalia of marijuana and she was not having that. So she ended up kicking me out of the house for a summer. And that just kind of just made me twirl more into self-shame and, self-hatred, and not feeling accepted and not feeling like anybody understood me. And on the other end, like, my boyfriend's mother was like allowed everything and didn't really have any rules. So it was kind of both extremes that I was in the middle of. And, I had engaged already at this point, in an intimate sexual relationship with him. And I wasn't really, being very careful about what the consequences could be with that. And my parents, scolded me several times about it. And I felt like I couldn't really trust anybody or seek anyone to ask these types of questions. And so I was kind of just hanging around in limbo, just figuring it all on my own and making a lot of mistakes along the way. And by the time this relationship ended, I was about 23 years old. And I was seeking answers. I was, had already had a few boyfriends and was, partying a lot and drinking a lot. And I just felt like, even though I had a lot of freedom and I was able to do a lot of, partying and have a lot of friends, and everything kind of looked great on the surface, I was really empty inside. I felt really quite lost and was looking for answers. And it was a colleague of mine who, at this point, I think I was about 20, about 20, 21. And I had been working a couple of different jobs. And at this one point, it was a person who I went to broadcasting school with. And sorry, I'm just backtracking a little bit. I went to broadcasting school. I was a hairdresser for about 2 years. I went to a hairdressing program in high school and graduated and was working in a salon. But then I decided to go a totally different direction and took a broadcasting course. And in this course, I met a colleague who introduced me to a documentary that you're probably very familiar with called The Secret. And this was kind of like a big aha moment for me, where I felt like, oh my goodness, like, I was so grateful to have found this documentary, The Secret, because it was explaining the law of attraction and how, your positive thoughts attract positive outcomes and your negative thoughts attract negative outcomes. And so that you're basically in control of your life and that you are your master of your destiny.
Yeah.
And I really felt like at that point in my life, like a light bulb had gone off, and I had started to read books from Dr. Wayne Dyer, about the power of intention, because another colleague had brought that into me. And so I started to feel like all of these synchronicities that, the universe was telling me. And that's how I felt, because that was the terminology that was being used in both the law of attraction and also in Dr. Wayne Dyer's books. And I felt like, okay, this is kind of the answer about spirituality and about the universe and how things work. And I really feel like that was a turning point for me, where I definitely did not really want to have anything to do with anything Christian at that point. I was totally already away from it and didn't have a relationship with Christ. But this put me even further away from him, because now it was trickling thoughts in my mind and changing my perception about the world, really. And so I thought, wow, like everything that I was taught was wrong, and Christians really don't know what they're talking about. They're very ignorant. And I really started to get very much involved into reading all of these types of books, the law of attraction. And I, amidst all of this stuff, I was still smoking and still, kind of bouncing in and out of different relationships. I ended up being in a relationship with a particular guy that was even more toxic than my previous relationships. Like super partying, like insane amounts of partying and drinking, lots of drugs. It was a very superficial, very, very superficial relationship. There was absolutely no love. It was all very much just to, for pleasure of the senses and just to kind of escape. And I just do want to mention that even though in reflection, I see all of this as being a very toxic period of my life, I'm not necessarily placing any blame on these individuals, because they were not necessarily bad people. They just, were making toxic choices, and I was just just joining the ride, and always seeking that validation from males and from guys. And so I was, reading all of these books, also just kind of, in that seeking mode. And towards the very tail end of this relationship, I had decided that I couldn't be in it anymore because of, he was very dishonest. He had basically lied to me about being in several relationships at the same time. And as a result of that, when I broke it off with him, I realized that I had kind of, I was diagnosed with like an incurable illness because of our relations. And that was kind of what tipped me over the edge. So I remember even to this day being at the doctor's office and, having this, these symptoms. And when I got the call from the doctor, I was in the office and he said, okay, he gave me the diagnosis, and he looked at me, and I remember like when he gave me the diagnosis, it was almost like time stopped. And I really feel that the Lord was cloaking me, because I felt like a strong message that said, do not listen to this. If you follow me, I will give you the answer. And I felt like, and I didn't know that it was the Holy Spirit. I felt like the universe was, interceding at the time, and that I would find a cure for this. So I basically took that diagnosis. It crushed me, but I also felt like in that midst, that brief, 2 seconds in there, I kind of made a very quick mental decision that I wouldn't take the usual route of treatment for this illness. And so I told the doctor, hey, you know what? Thank you for all your help, but I think I'm going to, figure this out on my own. And so my heart and my whole entire life collapsed, basically, because it is an STI. And because of this particular STI, I was thinking I wouldn't be able to have kids, that nobody would love me, that I would never be accepted anymore, that I would be rejected. Yeah. And I felt so much self-shame and guilt. I was unable to forgive myself, because in this relationship that I was in that caused this, the Lord definitely had his hand and was warning me constantly. And even though I stepped away from him, the Holy Spirit never stepped away from me. And I remember having very clear moments where God was saying, Natalia, don't play with this fire. Don't play with this fire. And I don't want you to be in this. But I was so stubborn. I'm like, I'm young. I just want to, have fun. And I've been in a long-term relationship for a very long time. And I just want to be with someone for fun and not have to worry about anything. So I was very stubborn. But I remember there were certain times when this particular guy would admit things to me about what he'd done on the weekend or what he was interested in, that it would disconcern me. It was very disconcerting, and it would concern me, but I would just kind of quickly put that under the rug and pretend like it didn't bother me. So the Lord was definitely warning me about this particular relationship. And, I ended up calling this individual and telling him about what had happened. And, you need to be aware about what you're doing to women and what you have, and you're hurting people. And unfortunately, because of the place that he was in, he was unable to be empathic, unable to apologize, unable to be supportive, and just kind of denied the whole thing. So I was left on my own. After coming home from the doctors, though, I just felt like so depleted, and I broke down. I went to this particular area close to my home and just saw, a private area, and just broke down in tears and felt like my entire world had just been pulled under my feet, and that I didn't know where to go, who to ask, who to talk to. God forbid I would ever tell my mom, because that would just be like another repetition of what I had lived through my teenage years of being, punished for acting out in such ways. Yeah. So I just fell on my knees crying, and I just cried out to the Lord, or not to, well, I should have, but I cried out to just the universe, basically, because that's where I was. I was like, I didn't address Jesus. I didn't address God. I just said, universe, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know what direction to take in, but you have told me that if I trust you, that you will give me the answer. So it was basically like an open invitation. It wasn't directed towards anyone particular. Mm-hmm. And I think that that was a very, very pivotal point in my life where I was kind of already, in that direction, but because I did such an open-ended question and just like left it open to the ethers, I invited a whole plethora of things that I was completely unaware of what I was dabbling in and what I was inviting. And I remember shortly after that, a friend of mine told me that she, like just momentarily after that, she called me and she told me that she wanted to, use me as a kind of a guinea pig, as a tester for her practice, because she was doing a particular healing modality that she was learning in a school, and she wanted to use me as one of her test patients. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the answer. This, the universe has answered me. And again, a very, very warm, loving, well-intended person. Sure. And wanting to share what she had learned with me. And so I started to get into this type of energy healing, which is basically what it is. And that, from that point forward, I just went like deep into new age spirituality. So not only was I reading a book here and there, but I started to watch documentaries like Zeitgeist. I started to deeply get into more so things like of the law of attraction, and energy healing. And I remember that I was working in a particular kind of an office at this point, and I remember like on my route to and from this place, there was a particular woman that would live in that same building that was deeply involved in yoga, and she was deeply involved in meditation and all of these kinds of things. And I would always smell her apartment because it was like she created a lot of home care body products. So it was always very appealing to me. And she always had like a picture of a particular guru, like a Hindu guru, like on her window. And all of that stuff kind of seemed a bit odd to me, but I remember like being on a bus and seeing the same picture of this particular guru on the window and the windshield of a business, and it said, "You are not a sinner." And that was like, oh, I'm not a sinner. So again, going back to my childhood, it was like, I guess what they had taught me was wrong, and I'm not a sinner. And I felt like, again, the universe was synchronizing all of these things in order for me to go into that direction. And so,
and you probably felt that validation then as well.
Yes,
an
absolutely.
Acceptance. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that I didn't have to feel ashamed or guilty or even sorry for the decisions that I had made, you know. And one of the things that I felt that was kind of, I guess, in a way, it's toxic and also very misleading to me, was that because I started to read books from Louise Hay, like self-healing and all of these energy healing type of modalities, is that I started to believe that the reason why I contracted this illness and the reason why I had all of these things was because of some things that I had done in a past life, and because of shame and guilt that I had harbored inside of me from my childhood growing up as a Catholic. So I was taught that, this was kind of a lesson for me, that the illness I had was a blessing and it wasn't a curse, and that basically the illness that I had was a teacher, and so I should honor it and that I should respect it, and that if I changed my thoughts and that I meditated on it, that I could certainly dissolve of this illness. And I started to get very involved into believing in the chakras. So because if you're listening to this and you're not aware of what chakras are, well, in New Age and kind of Eastern mysticism, chakras are like the 7 energy centers that are kind of up and down your body. And according to these Eastern teachings, is that if you have any blockages in these particular chakras, they manifest in different illnesses and different symptoms. And so I was very focused on working on my root chakra, which is the one that's at the base of the spine, And I started to really, really believe all of this, that I had all of these things from past lives even that I hadn't resolved. And so I was dealing with karma. And so everything I was blaming but putting the responsibility on myself, not only for why I got it, but also for how I was going to resolve it. I was completely and solely responsible for it. And so getting back to this neighbor that I had, I walked in one day, and that was kind of like a vortex that I walked into that I didn't get pulled out of for several years. I developed a very deep relationship and friendship with this woman, who I felt like at the time, because I was feeling so vulnerable, from feeling like I couldn't talk to anybody about this, and I couldn't tell anybody about this illness, and I couldn't tell anybody about what I had gone through. She was very accepting, and even to this day, like a very kind individual, super, super kind. And all she wanted to do was to help me and to support me. And so her apartment was basically like a shrine to several different Hindu gods and goddesses, and she did her daily yoga and her daily meditation. And I basically fell under her wing. I felt like I was like, not an apprentice per se, because it wasn't like for a job or anything, but I really felt like she was mentoring me deeply. And I spent many hours with her every day. I would get off of work and go directly to her place and sit and smoke and talk for hours and hours. And everything that I was learning at the time was all, a new age spirituality, where all of the things that I was experiencing as far as this illness of the rejection that I had gone through with men, the toxic relationships that I had gone through, my parents' separation, like all of these things were steps in order for me to reach enlightenment. So it was kind of like I had to go through all of this sadness and all of this hurt and all of this pain in order for me to ascend to higher levels of consciousness. So at this point,
and there might be, sorry for interrupting, but there may be people listening who, what I often find is there are a lot of people involved in the things that you've listed today, and yet they wouldn't call it New Age. They just wouldn't use that particular term, and they might even,
that's right.
They might even laugh at the concept of New Age, and yet they are actually involved in all of these things, and they are, this is the spiritual path they are on. So sometimes I say, a neo-New Age or esoteric or mystic or whatever, because sometimes people just seem to be locked on the label of New Age, and they're actually involved in it and they don't realise they're involved in it. I find that a lot. I just thought I would worth mentioning that.
No, thank you for saying, because it's so like it's so clear, and it's very true. And I mean, even myself at that time didn't identify a New Ager. And I think one of the things that I would like to add to that is that I considered myself spiritual, but not religious.
Exactly.
And I think that, that's a very comfortable place to go into and say, you're a very spiritual person. I considered myself being very, very spiritual, but not necessarily following one path. And I think the very comforting thing that I felt at that time was that I really fell into a particular community that all these individuals were very accepting, very, very kind, loving, joyful people who all they really wanted was, peace on earth and to help the environment. And, were very also health conscious individuals who practiced yoga and exercised and biked and drank smoothies and were very conscientious about the foods they were consuming. So I really felt like all of that really fell into alignment with my value system, because they were people who were seeking a spiritual life, but also to live in a physical world, being conscientious of consumerism and, what was going on in the environment and all of these types of things. So I felt like I had really found a home. I really felt like I found a family, acceptance. I could have open conversations about questions that I had and also experiences without feeling shame. And so I really fell into the lap of a community that even to this day, I know are most of the, for the most part, like kind people who are seeking truth and wanting to give service to others, but aren't realizing the true source of what they're practicing. And I felt, because I was so young and I didn't have a very anchored relationship with my mom either, that I was seeking mentoring and mothering and kind of that parenting from different sources, And, at this point, I started to bring home books and, I never spent too much time at home. That's one point too that I remember. My home, I treated more like a hotel. I would just go home, shower, quickly eat and change, and I would, leave. And so my room was always a complete disaster. I had absolutely no honor or respect for keeping a tidy space to call my own, because I just didn't want to be around my mom, my family in general. But at this point, I was bringing home books, and, she could hear my conversations, and she knew that I was, still smoking. And so, my mom, being very gentle and kind of not, too pushy, would question me a little bit and say, like, what is it that you're doing? And what's this book about? And I would get frustrated with her. I was like, Mom, you don't have to worry. I'm not following a cult. There's only one God. Even if I don't call him Jesus, at the end of the day, there's only one source. So at this point, I wasn't even calling him God anymore. I was just saying source and point of energy. And my whole perspective on God had become had changed from a very personal God to what I had when I was 4-year-old, to a very pantheistic view of God, which is like everything is God, and we're all just energy. And so I don't pray to a person. I pray to, or I meditate rather, to the source, which is in everything. And that was a lot more comforting to me, because there wasn't.
You did a lot of meditation too?
Yes, I did a lot of meditation. I felt like it was very easy for me to do. For some people, it's very challenging and they don't like to sit in silence. But for me, because I was so surrendered and so dedicated and committed to getting rid of this illness, like that was my focal point. But also, I had committed myself after this diagnosis that I would not be sexually active with anybody until I knew that I was cured and that I was completely rid of this disease. And so, that was a positive thing. That's one positive thing, was that I became like celibate and just kind of like focused on myself and did meditation and ate healthy. And it was very easy for me to fall into very deep meditations where I would completely go utterly blank and have no thoughts in my mind. And at that point, I felt like that was exactly what I needed in order for me to like heal and to ascend and to clean karma out, was, to just be in a place of stillness and connect with my source. And because I actually had physiological and emotional experiences, I really didn't feel that there was absolutely any reason why what I was experiencing was dark or that it was wrong, because what I felt was bliss. What I felt was peace. What I saw in my community was like really happy, loving, kind-hearted people. So there was absolutely nothing in my environment that would point to me and say, Natalia, what you're practicing is dark. Natalia, what you're practicing is evil. And as a matter of fact, if anybody, that I came across that was, Christian or came from a Christian background said like, oh, you should be careful with yoga because it's evil, like I would laugh at it. And I would say, how dare they say that? When I practice my yoga and I practice my meditation, like I feel so much peace and I feel so much bliss. And I did involve myself in getting into some workshops that were kind of metaphysical workshops that would get even deeper into like healing and so-called the term purging, like old karma. And so in these workshops, you would basically be in a small group of people. It was called like One Mind or something like that. And you would use, the group would use one person as kind of like the body to like the body and the vessel to purge all of our collective trauma. And so I was used at one point as this
a bit
vessel,
like a scapegoat.
Yeah, like a scapegoat.
Okay. Yeah.
So you would be able to go back to a certain point. So the leader, the kind of the teacher of the class, would use a particular tool. She was using kind of like a metal wand. And so she would swirl this wand around you, and she would figure out, depending on where in your body she would feel you're reacting to it. She would not only swirl it around the body, but at the same time, she would be saying, okay, pregnancy, 2 months, 3 months. So she would kind of go back in time. You're doing a meditation, and then after the meditation, you're in this kind of trance-like state. And she would kind of go back in time in your lifespan, going back to, from conception all the way to where you are now. And so if there was a point where she would say like 6 months of life, or like 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and you have some type of a physical reaction while she's waving this wand around,
Sure.
she would be indicated that you have some trauma stuck in there, but it wasn't just you, but it was also the group as a collective who had something to purge from this. So I did about 3 of these different workshops. And at one of them, I remember very vividly, it was so radical. Like I remember at one point when she was doing this, my whole body started to convulse and to bend over. And I started to cry, like violently cry out, and tears were just flooding, and it was not a very comfortable feeling. And I actually had to have the whole group hold me because I was just completely like just moving around so weirdly. And then after that, she said a couple of words, and she said, to release. And then I started to laugh hysterically. And just like I picked myself off up the ground, and I started to laugh hysterically, and like just nonstop, uncontrollable laughter. So to us as the group witnessing that, we had felt like, going from sadness to utter bliss, like that was healing. And so we had closed the door on that trauma that we had held on in our chakras. So we were getting, physical, metaphysical results. Like we were getting like actual, witnessing certain things. And so we were very much convinced that this was the right way to go.
It sounds very similar to me. Sorry for interrupting, but I had a similar experience back when I was into New Age, and it was called rebirthing. There was a lot of books out in the 80s and 90s about it, and I went to a place called the Phoenix Center, very New Age, and I went through that, and it was really quite traumatic. They said they were taking me back to literally being a baby in the womb and rebirthing again, and it was actually horrible. I remember, crunching myself up into the fetal position, and it was just not pleasant at all. But I did cry a lot, and they said that was natural, and that after it, they actually said I would never be unhappy again. My life would be so transformed and all of this, which actually wasn't true. But it wasn't till later on that when I became a Christian, I realised it was a false rebirthing experience, as it were. A kind of like the demonic counterpart of getting born again through Jesus, I suppose. And I did need cleansing from being involved in that actual activity. So there's similarities. I guess that a lot of these things, they can be called different names under different spiritualities, but underlying there's that same theme that's going on, really.
Oh, for sure. And it was, a community that I was in, like everybody was kind of doing it and enjoying it. And like the friendships that I had formed, in these workshops were very, quite intense. And we all felt quite open, to vulnerable with each other and to tell each other our deepest secrets. And so we were kind of like allowing our entire souls to be put out on display. And because everybody was equally just as vulnerable and open, we didn't feel like there was anything risky about it, and we were getting these incredible, euphoric feelings of bliss and joy. And so we were like, wow, this is incredible. We feel the whole world, should really get on board with this. The world would be such an amazing place if everyone just do this. And by this point, because I was meditating and, doing these workshops, the next level was, I felt like because I started, getting heavily involved in this, that I started to develop particular abilities that I didn't before. And so because of what I was taught, I was told that I was awakening my higher self. So my higher self now has like abilities that were dormant there for many times, and that were in my Akashic Records, and so in my past life, I was told in my past life, I was a very powerful healer woman, probably from like a Native American background. And so like those abilities that I had in that lifetime are stored in my consciousness, and I just had to awaken them. And that was very like appealing to me, and it quite buffed up my ego. It made me feel really good,
Yeah.
you know, to think of myself as a healer. And the one thing too that was also quite appealing about all of this as well is that all of the experiences of darkness or experiences of negativity that I had experienced and was continuing to experience, like, you know, any trouble at work or any conflict, it was always blamed on ego, right? It wasn't you know, like anything else, it's like, oh no, your ego is showing up to show you a lesson. Your ego is showing up to teach you something, or somebody else's ego is reflecting something about your ego. So it was like, on this point, my directive and my mission was to eliminate myself of my ego self and reach my higher self and live from that point always. And what I started to notice was that I felt a strong desire to heal people. And the interesting thing is that my career at this point, I had reemerged myself into, you know, hairdressing. After graduating from broadcasting, I decided that I wouldn't pursue that just for political reasons, but I was still in hairdressing, but I had become an educator for a more or less like somewhat of a holistic hair company that taught scalp massaging and essential oils and that kind of thing. So because I was teaching people to do scalp massages in a salon setting, when I started to teach after these workshops, I felt like what I was teaching wasn't just for physical healing. I felt like when I would put my hands on people that I could read their story, that I could open up their personal mail, and like I would know stuff about them, that I would sense things about them. And because it's in a professional salon setting, I didn't feel like I was necessarily allowed to talk about that kind of stuff because it was unprofessional. But I really felt like a strong urge, like, oh, you know, like I'm massaging this person and I felt like my hands would get tingly. And when I was massaging, you know, the models or the individuals, like I felt like such a strong urge to share certain things with them, and to, like, you know, draw energy to certain parts of their body. So eventually I looked into that a little bit more and ended up reading partially the book. I think it's called, I wish I would have written this down. I think it's called Hands of Light or Healing. I think it was by the author. Her first name is Barbara. I'm going to look it up and mention it next. Mention it. But basically, the book is all about how to become a healer and teaching how to, you know, utilize your hands in order to heal individuals of several, you know, sicknesses and mental traumas. And you know, it's a very, very huge book, and like basically it's part of a course, and there's like a whole like what's it called, like a whole course, and even a school, I think, somewhere in California for it. And
of course, this stuff works. It does work, and that's why it is such a draw for people and such an attraction.
Yes,
Natalia,
it's called actually Hands of Light. Barbara Brennan. There you go.
Hands of Light. We're almost running out of time, so we definitely need you back for a part 2.
Yes.
But just before we go, we've just got a few moments. If you do have any source material you want to recommend to listeners, then please share that. And also, could you please pray for listeners now?
Yeah. So I would suggest people who are still questioning this, you know, if they're dabbling in these types of practices, and even if they are getting results, because I'm not denying that they do come, I would highly suggest that you look, you know, even into Laura Maxwell's rich resources that she has through her interviews and also through her talks, and you know, the books and her own personal testimonials. I think Laura is a fantastic resource for this, and she was one of the tools and the resources that I really felt I depended on. There's also another author and speaker, Warren B. Smith, who is also an excellent speaker on these types of topics. Also Joanna Michelson, she's fantastic as well. She has books and also has several videos on YouTube. And she talks a lot about this. And there's there's a couple other people on YouTube, but Carol Matriciana is also a fantastic resource, for people who really want to seek out people who are not necessarily sheltered from this type of lifestyle, but who've lived in it for many decades and have gone through several of these same experiences. I would even 1,000 times deeper than I was in it and have a different perspective now. I think it's very valuable to look these different people up, because they give their personal accounts, and it just kind of gives a picture to the story and allows for you to connect a little bit more and find some good resources of valid information. So, yeah. So those people are always been people I suggest. So I just want to pray for the audience right now. I just pray in Jesus' name that whoever's listening to this story receives it with love, because I share it with love. I share it with sincere love, that their hearts would be open and their ears would be open to hear a message of truth, not a message of fear, but a message of delivering of warning, and also alert, for them to be alert and aware and open to receiving this message, and that their minds and that their spirits will be touched in a way so that they do seek answers, not necessarily from people, but would go straight to the truth, which is God, which is a personal God, and that there's nothing wrong. There's absolutely nothing wrong or any shame in just asking. And that's something that I suggest to all of my peers or any friends that I still have who still don't know, is just ask directly. There's nothing that you have to lose by just asking, what is the truth and what direction you should be taking in order to reach pure love and pure freedom. So I just pray in Jesus' name that the humility and the sincerity would be in their hearts in order for them to seek the truth, asking a direct question to God himself. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Natalia, and I really look forward to having you back again for part 2.
The views expressed in this production may not necessarily be those of Eternal Radio. Eternal Radio.
Music for your life with Eternal Radio.
End Time Hour is broadcast only on Eternal Radio, along with a host of other unique and excellent programs. Now Eternal Radio is even easier to listen to. You can do this by simply visiting eternalradio.org.uk. That's eternalradio.org.uk and clicking on the Listen Now link. Alternatively, you can listen in on your phone by downloading the TuneIn app, or Eternal Radio's very own dedicated apps for both Android and iPhone. It's also possible to tune in on a variety of other platforms, including Amazon's Fire TV. Also, if you have any questions for me or for other Eternal Radio hosts, please email us at onairnow@eternalradio.org.uk. That's onairnow@eternalradio.org.uk.